and welcome to this edition of Reporters, the magazine that showcases stories from our correspondents around the world. Well, this week we look at whether Islamic extremism is on the rise in Mauritania. The northwest African nation is a Muslim country, a largely desert land and one of the world's poorest nations. And up to now, it's been a relatively peaceful place. But last December, this peace was brutally shattered. 4 French tourists were gunned down in broad daylight. Authorities believe the attackers could be militants linked to al-Qaeda's branch in North Africa. Well, the crime shocked the nation and prompted the cancellation of the prestigious Dakar rally over security fears. France24's Franck Berroyer and Nicolas Germain travelled to Mauritania to find a country coming to grips with the possibility of terror on its doorstep.
Mauritania is stunned. The Dakar rally is cancelled. More than half the stages were planned here. Usually the race is the year's major event. It's vital for the country's economy and for its image. For security reasons, the French Foreign Ministry strongly advised all French citizens not to go to Mauritania. The organisers had little option but to cancel the rally. For the Mauritanian government, the decision is totally unjustified.
I want to reassure everyone that Mauritania remains a peaceful country despite the recent isolated murders. It's an open country, a welcoming one.
Mauritanians feel the rally's organisers have caved in to terrorists.
I regret that the French authorities didn't trust the guarantees of the Mauritanian government, because cancelling the rally means you are encouraging terrorists.
Everything started with the murder of 4 French tourists on Christmas Eve, something unheard of in this country. It was followed 2 days later by a deadly attack by al-Qaeda on 3 Mauritanian soldiers. We go to Aleg, a 4-hour drive to the southeast of Nouakchott, where the French tourists were killed. A small, impoverished town where travellers often stop. It has a petrol station and a few small shops. The 2 cars of the French victims are now parked in front of the local police station. Aleg's inhabitants can't get over this murder.
My condolences.
We have nothing to do with this crime. We don't want anyone to be hurt in our country. We are really sorry. What has happened is scandalous. It's a great shame for us.
According to the authorities, the murderers are linked to the al-Qaeda branch in the Islamic Maghreb, the new name of the Salafist group for preaching and combat, an Algerian movement.
This is a peaceful country. Those who did this will be caught and eliminated. Mauritania is really a peaceful country.
To follow the attackers' trail, you have to leave the asphalt road and take a dirt track for 3 kilometers until you reach the village of Lelewa. A few small houses and corrugated iron huts. After the crime, the 3 murderers reportedly hid here. In Mauritania, many people say Muslim radicals live here in tents as they do in Afghanistan. The police have arrested a man whose wife lives in the village. He's a radical known as Abu Said. They accuse him of being the attacker's sidekick. We're taken to his tent. But here, the inhabitants say they don't really know him.
There are no preachers here. This man came here with his family because he got married here. But we can't do anything about that. He came here with his family on December the 20th.
On the 19th, his wife came to see her parents who were ill.
They're known as outlaws. They live in isolation. We have nothing to do with them.
We are good Muslims. Our religion forbids such crimes. We're really sorry for what has happened. We're good Muslims, and we pray to God that He forgives this crime.
2 of the 3 murderers had already been imprisoned, accused of being extremists, but they were released in June 2007. Is Mauritania the latest North African country to fall prey to Muslim extremism? To understand the situation, you have to go back in time. The first concrete evidence of extremism appeared in 2005. An attack against an army camp left 15 people dead. The previous authoritarian government put 24 Muslim radicals in jail. In March 2007, a new president is democratically elected. 3 months later, he releases them. Some say it's an attempt to appease Islamist circles. The new head of state also authorizes the creation of an Islamist political party. Its president, Mohamed Jamil Ould Mansour, was imprisoned in 2003. This is how he defines his movement.
Our party is a political party with Islamic references. We are moderates. All political parties in Mauritania must be moderate Islamic parties, because we are an Islamic republic. Our vision of Islam is not against openness, democracy, or modernity.
Mansour admits there is an extremist threat in Mauritania.
Mauritania is not isolated from the rest of the world. And certainly, there could be some extremist elements here in Mauritania. In our program, as a reformist moderate party, we are going to work to spread a tolerant Islamic way. We are going to explain the dangers of extremism here in Mauritania.
Nouakchott, the capital of the first state that ever called itself Islamic Republic. But there is not a radical implementation of Sharia Islamic law. The town had 25 mosques in the early 1980s and 617 in 2002. Those who were recently labelled extremists and were released in June now debate freely in Nouakchott. They've become respectable and respected. They organise round tables. Here the theme is violence and extremism, causes and possible solutions. We were able to meet several of the men who were released 6 months ago. They call for a strict respect of Sharia, they don't want women to work, and they defend jihad in countries where they say Muslims are being occupied. In front of our camera, they choose their words carefully. Like all hardliners here, Ahmed Mizid Ould Abdelhak condemns the December attacks.
All the theologists and preachers here wrote in the local media and on the internet and issued fatwas to stress that there is no reason for jihad in Mauritania. We are not an occupied land. In Algeria and Morocco, that's their problem. I only speak of my country.
We ask him if he's a Salafist, a traditionalist.
If you mean Salafist in the sense of ancestor of Islam via our ancestors, then all Muslims must be Salafists, and I am too. If you mean Salafist in the sense it has today, its media and security meaning, then I'm not one.
Nouakchott's central market. A loudspeaker plays out a preach by Mokhtar El Hassan Ould Dedou. He's the radicals' figurehead in Mauritania. Today his preachings can be bought anywhere. Dedou studied in Saudi Arabia, and he too was imprisoned under the previous government. We meet him in his house where bankers, shopkeepers, policemen come and seek his advice on how to be good Muslims.
How is work? Okay? When I was in prison, I issued fatwas daily, and people came to me for advice. Imagine, even in prison.
Dedou says there are terrorists in Mauritania, but he wants to be reassuring.
They are a minority amongst our Muslim population.
The Arafat district, one of the poorest areas of the capital. Dirt tracks, carts drawn by donkeys. This is where we meet the local imam, Abdelai Ould Aminou, another former prisoner. He's considered a hardliner, the Salafist's ideologue. For him, Sharia is not developed enough in Mauritania.
I believe French people hope that if we arrest those who killed the tourists, then they should be executed. And so they have to understand that if someone kills a Muslim soul, then they must be executed. If someone commits adultery, then he must be whipped. And if someone steals and terrorizes others, then his hand must be cut off. That's a human rights principle, because Allah knows humans better than humans do.
Uldaminu says he knows of jihadist links between Mauritania and Afghanistan.
Mauritanians have been influenced by internet websites where jihadists propagate their views. And some youngsters have been influenced by Mauritanians who did jihad in Afghanistan during the Russian occupation. They have been indoctrinated by the jihadist movement.
Mauritania thought it had not been contaminated by extremism, but now articles on the topic make the headlines. For the director of the weekly Tahalil, the issue of Muslim radicals in Mauritania must be tackled.
We have to look at this issue in the face, but we mustn't exaggerate it. This is the beginning. We have just been contaminated by these jihadists, Salafists. We don't have suicide bombers and attacks every day like in some countries. This was the first attack on foreigners. It must be a signal, but we mustn't exaggerate the danger and say now you mustn't go to Mauritania. We mustn't neglect this risk. The security services must work on this, and religious people and school teachers must play a role, and the population must disown these attacks.
Friday, Muslims come to pray in Nouakchot's biggest mosque, funded by Saudi Arabia. This is where the president prays every week. He's chosen a Salafist to be Minister of Islamic Affairs. With 2 attacks in 3 days late December, Mauritania has become the latest North African country to be hit by terrorists. The situation is not comparable to some of its neighbours, but alarm bells have already started ringing.
Well, I'm joined in the studio by one of the reporters behind that story, Nicolas Germain. Nicolas, let's talk about those French tourists that were killed first of all. Now, where are we at in terms of the investigation?
Well, so far 8 people have been arrested. They're accused of having helped the 3 attackers. One of those who's been arrested is Abu Said. We go to the village where he used to live and we see the villagers and they say, we don't know him, he was an extremist, but we're not, we're innocent. And the 3 attackers, they're still on the run. The last time they were seen, it was in Senegal, and the authorities say this shows there are no Salafist military camps in Mauritania, the fact they had to flee to Senegal. What's embarrassing for the government is that 2 of the 3 attackers had been released last June after having been put in prison for their extremist ideas.
Now, Mauritania has only very recently become a democracy. Do you think that has had some form of impact on the possible rise of religious extremism in the country?
That's what some people are saying, because in 2005 there was a military coup. The military coup leaders said, we'll guarantee a democratic transition. No one believed them, but in fact they did do that, because in March 2007 there were democratic elections. All the international observers said they were transparent, and then 3 months later the Islamic radicals were released. Some say the president did that to appease the Islamic radical circles, but the fact is that this meant more freedom of speech, and some say that this down the road led to what we have today.
All right, let's talk about the Dakar car rally, of course, a very prestigious race, cancelled this year over security fears. Is that a one-off, or will the Dakar car race come back to Mauritania next year?
Well, people in Mauritania, they're very worried. The Dakar rally was so important for their economy, for their image, and now they really fear that it might never come again, because the organisers, they've been talking in the press saying maybe the Dakar rally, they'll call it something else, they can organise it on another continent. They've mentioned South America maybe, or other places around the world where they can find some deserts. And so people in Mauritania are really, really worried right now.
Well, many tourists, of course, come for the Dakar rally. They also come to Mauritania as those 4 French tourists who tragically lost their lives there. How popular is tourism, though, in Mauritania? Of course, it's not something we hear much about.
Official figures are 80,000 tourists a year. What you've got to know is it's a huge country, but only 3 million inhabitants. It's twice the size of France, and they really need these 80,000 tourists a year. And the shopkeepers and hotel owners we interviewed, they were really devastated when the rally was cancelled. Obviously, they fear it might be cancelled again. So for them, it was really a shock.
Okay, Nicolas Jalmin, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that fascinating behind-the-scenes look into Mauritania and the possible rise of religious extremism there. Well, that's all we have time for now. Don't forget, you can check this edition of Reporters on our website, France24.com, and you can also download it onto your iPod. That's all we have time for now. More Reporters next time.